Opus Dei's case of clergy sex abuse. The group reveals a settlement in 2005 against a once prominent Washington, D.C. priest. Capitol countdown. President Trump prepares to address the nation tonight on his border wall as the partial government shutdown continues to day 18. Middle East diplomacy. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo visits Jordan and talks about the war on terror. And a pilot project will tell you the unique way a bishop greets his flock in the Solomon Islands. On EWTN News Nightly for Tuesday, January 8th, 2019. Good evening from Washington, D.C., and thank you to those of you joining us from around the world for news from a Catholic perspective. I'm Lauren Ashburn. The Catholic organization Opus Dei paid almost $1 million to settle a sexual misconduct complaint. It was filed in 2005 against a once prominent priest in Washington, D.C. After an investigation, Father C. John McCloskey was removed from his post at the Catholic Information Center in the nation's capital. The complaint involved a married woman. The vicar of Opus Dei in the United States released a statement saying what happened was deeply painful for the woman, and we are very sorry for all she suffered. A settlement was reached. She has remained in contact with our activities. The Catholic Information Center also commented, "We are deeply saddened by this news. We wish to sincerely apologize and offer our fervent prayers to the victim and anyone else who has suffered because of this misconduct by Father McCloskey." Father McCloskey has Alzheimer's. He is known for converting high-powered Catholics, including Larry Kudlow, President Trump's top economic advisor, and abortionist Bernard Nathanson. McCloskey occasionally wrote for the National Catholic Register and had appeared on EWTN. My next guest has spoken out about the scandals in the Catholic Church. He is also the co-author of a new book that examines the Catholic faith from the perspective of adult converts. Joining me now is Robert George, McCormick Professor of Jurisprudence at Princeton University. Robert, welcome back to our broadcast.
Wonderful to be with you, Lauren.
We're delighted to have you. You know, we're learning again of another case of clergy sex abuse by a prominent member of the church. Opus Dei paid the settlement. You have spoken out on this. What does this mean? Is this an example of an organization coming forward or an example of an organization that hid information?
I don't know all the details, but from what I read in the Washington Post, which I believe broke the story last night, the woman who was involved, the victim to whom the settlement was paid, wanted the story not to be made public for some time, and then eventually came around to deciding she wanted the story to be made public so that if there were other victims, they would come forward. She praised Opus Dei as an organization for its cooperation, for how well it handled the case.
I want to turn to your new book, Mind, Heart, and Soul, Intellectuals and the Path to Rome, co-authored by R.J. Snell. It's a collection of interviews between lifelong Catholics and converts. And I've often said in reading this book, I agree with you, that converts seem more Catholic than cradle Catholics. Why did you decide that this was a story that needed to be told? And how did it reflect on your own faith?
Well, the first thing that I think we need to remember is that all Christians are converts. From a Catholic point of view, all Christians are converts. Some of us were converted to the faith when we were a week old.
Or 3 months.
Many years, or 3 months, some many years later. But no one is born into the Catholic faith. There are other religions that one is born into, but one is converted into the Christian faith from the Catholic point of view. But of course, there's a difference between what we call cradle Catholics, who were brought up in the faith by their parents, or the guardians responsible for them, and those we call converts, who are people who were brought up either with no faith or in a different tradition of faith, and then found their way, usually through reflection and prayer, thought, into the Catholic faith. And I have to confess, Lauren, that I'm the kind of cradle Catholic who has always had a certain kind of convert envy. I have a certain envy of converts.
I do too, because they've really studied the issues.
That's right.
And
they thought their way and prayed their way into the faith.
And I take, and you know, my faith, I just take it on faith, a lot of things. And they say, well, why do you think that? And I have to pause and think, well, I just do.
Well, we cradle Catholics, I think, rightly consider ourselves to be blessed to have been brought up in Catholic homes, ordinarily by Catholic parents, or at least one Catholic parent. We regard our faith as a great blessing and a gift that came from God through our families. And yet there is something very special about converts who did have to think and pray their way into the Catholic faith. Often the converts have had a great wrestling match with themselves. Whether they come from a secular tradition or whether they were Protestant or members of some other religious tradition, they've wrestled with whether they want to be, in many cases, fought against coming into the Catholic Church. John Henry Newman, who later became a cardinal, of course, great theologian, now someone who's being considered for canonization. John Henry Newman wrestled with the Catholic Church. He didn't want to enter the Catholic Church. He said he would never enter the Catholic Church.
And then what happened?
But he found his way into the Catholic Church.
And he could be a saint.
I should also point out, Lauren, that this book that you've kindly pointed out is really a book about intellectual converts. It's about converts who come from one or another wing of the contemporary intellectual culture. Some are academics, a couple are professors at Harvard, they're professors at other places. Some come out of the world of journalism, some from the arts. They're people from different walks of life, but people for whom thinking, reflection, intellectual work was part of their journey into the faith.
Well, it is a fascinating book, and I wish we had more time to talk about it. The bane of television is that, you only get seconds and minutes. Thank you so much, Robert George, McCormick Professor of Jurisprudence at Princeton University and the author of Mind, Heart, and Soul, Intellectuals, and the Path to Rome.
Thank you, Lauren.
For more stories of conversion, tune in to EWTN Mondays at 8 p.m. Eastern for The Journey Home. President Donald Trump is ready to make his case on primetime TV. The White House says he will stress humanitarian concerns tonight to convince America funding is needed for a long-promised border wall. We have team coverage tonight. Jason Calvi tells us about the rebuttal Democrats Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer will give after the president's speech. We start with Mark Irons at the White House for a preview. Good evening, Mark.
Good evening, Lauren. The president's primetime address will take place in the Oval Office, adding a sense of urgency to his message. Critics warn he will mislead the public, but White House officials tell me there is a crisis and the solution is a wall.
Why should the average American expect what the president says tonight is not motivated by politics or the desire to fulfill a campaign promise?
I think Americans need to hear from their president, their commander-in-chief, why he sees this as a security and a humanitarian crisis at the border. We can have this conversation just about the drugs. We can have the conversation just about the human trafficking. We can have the conversation just about the criminals.
President Trump will try to convince tonight's viewers a border wall must be built to stop what Kellyanne Conway, a senior advisor to the president, was describing there. Conway says the president does not plan to declare a national emergency tonight, but he will call it a crisis. And today, the White House Director of Strategic Communications defended that characterization.
When did the situation at the border become a humanitarian crisis as the president describes it?
When you're seeing 1 in 3 women being sexually assaulted, taking this dangerous journey, when you're seeing the smugglers basically bringing in over 20,000 minors a month, it's a humanitarian crisis.
So the president will address the nation tonight, and then we will join President Trump in McAllen, Texas. He's visiting the U.S.-Mexico border there on Thursday. McAllen is in the Diocese of Brownsville. Now, that diocese has filed a court challenge against the government's potential plan to construct the border wall on church property. Lauren?
White House correspondent Mark Irons. Thank you, Mark. Democrats tonight will immediately rebut the president. The major TV networks are giving time to both House Speaker Nancy Pelosi and Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer. They have been calling on the president to reopen the government while they negotiate border security. Capitol Hill correspondent Jason Calvi joins us. Good evening, Jason.
Good evening, Lauren. Democrats demanded this primetime rebuttal. They say it's needed because the president's past speeches have been filled with what they call malice and misinformation. Parts of the government ran out of money 18 days ago, and hundreds of thousands of federal workers face missing this week's paychecks.
The nation sinks into the second longest shutdown in U.S. history.
Well, it hurts West Virginians. 12,000 employees, federal employees in West Virginia are going to be without a paycheck Thursday.
Just one effect of the shutdown, sparked by a fight over the president's promised border wall. President Trump suggests he might go around Congress and declare a national emergency, allowing him to use other money to build the wall.
I'm confident he could declare a national emergency.
If he does, Democrats threaten to sue.
I'll guarantee you, if he tries to do something that is fundamentally illegal and not authorized by statute, he'll be challenged, not just in Congress, which could take some time, but in the courts. This is no way to resolve this crisis. The president should open the government today. Tell these people their paycheck is on the way.
But Democrat Joe Manchin of West Virginia says the president can declare a national emergency if it would stop the shutdown stalemate.
Well, he has a right to do that. It's going to go to court if he does that. But if that's what it takes to stop the shutdown, if he wants to declare that, and we can basically vote on the 6 bills, the appropriation bills, that opens up 90% of government and takes care of the funding we need to keep this country running, and it goes to court, let him fight it out in the courts.
Doesn't that take power away from you, though, as a senator in Congress here?
The Senate's already given, Congress over the years have given their power away to the executive. You know, they've been giving this away for many, many years, and the president's looking at everything that he can use that's been given to him, wrongfully, rightfully, whatever you want to look at it.
Speaker Pelosi says the House will pass bills to reopen federal agencies one by one. But Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell says his chamber won't take up legislation the president will veto. Trump has been calling lawmakers, and Vice President Pence is here courting House Republicans. Lauren?
Capitol Hill correspondent Jason Calvi. Thank you, Jason. Later in the broadcast, we will have a discussion about the political ramifications. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo kicks off an 8-nation tour of the Middle East today. He's asking U.S. allies in the region to ramp up pressure on Iran. But he's also answering questions about the president's plan to pull U.S. troops out of Syria. Correspondent Wyatt Goolsbee reports from the State Department. Good evening, Wyatt.
Good evening, Lauren. Secretary Pompeo is reassuring allies the U.S. is committed to fighting terrorism and defeating ISIS. This as U.S. partners in the Middle East are wondering when and how the U.S. will withdraw its 2,000 troops from war-torn Syria. Pompeo says the long-term solution is working with close partners like Jordan.
Your nation plays a critical role in regional security and stability, including through its efforts to peacefully resolve the Syrian conflict, fight the spread of radical Islamic terrorism, and counter the Iranian regime's malign activities in the region and the world.
Secretary Pompeo beginning his whirlwind tour of the Middle East in Jordan, telling the Jordanian king in the next few weeks the Trump administration will double down on commercial and diplomatic efforts against Iran. In addition to Jordan, Pompeo will travel to Egypt, Bahrain, the United Arab Emirates, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, Oman, and Kuwait. While Pompeo's focus is Iran, Luke Coffey, a Middle East expert, says the secretary is likely to field more questions about the U.S. pulling its troops out of Syria.
There are huge question marks remaining. How fast will the withdrawal happen? How will it be coordinated with our partners and allies in the region?
Pompeo says there is no timetable for withdrawal. They want to make sure ISIS is completely gone before they leave. The fight against the terrorist group and the nearly 8-year-long civil war has left Syria dealing with a humanitarian crisis. Coffey says religious minorities like Christians have been caught in the crossfire.
On one hand, you have the brutality of Assad that affects the whole country, that is the cause of the fighting in the civil war. And then you also have the opposition, the so-called rebels, who don't have the best track record either in terms of protecting the Christian minority.
Coffey agrees with some Christian groups who are worried life could get worse without the presence of U.S. troops. He says it's critical the U.S. work with its allies to help religious minorities. There's one other factor that could make the Syrian war more complicated. Turkey's president says their military is prepared to enter Syria to fight the Kurds, who they view as terrorists. President Erdogan is slamming National Security Advisor John Bolton, who says the U.S. would prevent any attack against the Kurds, who the U.S. views as an ally in helping in the fight against ISIS. Lauren?
Correspondent Wyatt Goolsbee reporting from the State Department. Thank you, Wyatt. North Korea leader Kim Jong-un arrived today in Beijing to meet with China's president. The two may be coordinating a second summit between Pyongyang and the United States. This is Kim's motorcade arriving for the meeting with President Xi Jinping, his only major ally. State television shows Kim leaving North Korea yesterday. He was joined by his wife and other top officials. President Trump met with Kim in June 2018. U.S. and North Korean officials are believed to have met recently in Vietnam to discuss a second summit. A report says a retired cardinal who has been tapped to run the Catholic Church in Hong Kong is shocked at the appointment. John Tong Han was the bishop of the former British colony, now belonging to China, from 2009 to 2017. The South Morning Post reports the cardinal does not believe it is a political decision and has more to do with his experience. Father Bernardo Cevallera is the editor-in-chief of Asia News. Welcome back to our broadcast, Father. Cardinal Tong supports the deal between the Vatican and China. Some critics say the Vatican is conceding too much to the Chinese government. Tell us what you're hearing from Hong Kong.
From Hong Kong, there are these two problems. One is the destiny of the bishops who are in prison and bishops who are underground. We don't know what will happen with them because there are some underground bishops who step down to give way and to give the space and the honor to the bishops who had been excommunicated before. And this is a very strange way to implement the agreement.
Let's talk about the more than 500,000 Catholics who are living in Hong Kong. What are the greatest challenges that the next bishop of Hong Kong will face?
But now the problem is who will be the new bishop, and there is already a candidate which is Bishop Joseph Ha, who is a very good bishop, but some say he is too implicated in the movement for democracy. So perhaps he is not too much loved by China, and so there are discussions about who will be the new bishop. Now the Vatican has appointed Cardinal Tong as apostolic administrator, who will run the diocese until the new bishop is designated. And some say that this choice of Cardinal Tong is because the Vatican doesn't like Bishop Ha. In reality, I think that the apostolic administrator is a kind of transitional appointment that will give the announcement of the new bishop. And the fact that Bishop Ha has not been chosen as apostolic administrator means that he might be among the candidates. So there are
Father,
some hopes.
Father, let me ask you this. But what about the people of Hong Kong? How does this affect them, the Catholics?
The Catholics, let us say, they are quite divided. There are those, above all, young people who would like to have some bishop like Cardinal Zen, who defend freedom, who strengthen the request for democracy in the territory, and tries to spread democracy also in China with freedom of religion. Others, they say that it's better not to move too much the boat, because if not, China will imprison the entire Hong Kong. China already influences the economy of Hong Kong, influences the politics of Hong Kong.
Thank you so much for your insight on this, Father Bernardo Cevallera, Chief Editor of Asia News.
Bye.
Coming up, the political ramifications behind the political strategy for President Trump and his border wall. As we reported, President Trump will speak directly to the American people tonight, making his case for the need for a border wall between the U.S. and Mexico. Joining me now to talk about the political strategy behind tonight's address is Brian Darling, president and founder of Liberty Government Affairs. Brian, welcome back to our broadcast.
Thanks for having me on.
Why make this address to the nation now? And who is the intended audience?
Well, I think this is one of those opportunities for the president to make his message and give his message directly to the American people without a filter. I think he likes to do that. He hasn't done it to this date. But it's fascinating to see that he is going to do it, and the Democrats are going to have a counter message. So it'll be almost like a State of the Union where you have the president speak and then a response.
The speech is being met by skepticism with those who disagree with him, and people are already saying he's going to be lying without even him giving the speech. But the media will fact check him. He'll be challenged. Why does he need to make this case?
Well, I think there's a lot of confusion about what's happened in Washington. How is it possible that the government shut down when we have had an appropriations bill that Congress almost passed that funded part of the wall? Why do we need that extra money? I think he's going to make the case and why, in something that he's been talking about for 2 years, on why that wall is needed, why it will help the southern border and help our border patrol to protect America. And it's something where he takes that case right to the American people where he's at his best.
As he does on Twitter on a daily basis, right?
Yes.
So I think we need to talk about Democrats in this. Are they going to be tarnished at all by this shutdown?
They may. I think they've taken a very tough position. I think it's, in one sense, it's hard to defend when at one point they were okay with some border money, but now they say not one more dollar. That's an odd position to take, but they will, again, the Democrats will have their chance to make their say too. So ultimately, there has to be a way out. I mean, both sides are dug in. We're going to hear them speak tonight, and we're going to know very clearly at the end of both of those speeches if there is any common ground and if this government shutdown is going to end soon.
Let's talk about the 800,000 federal workers, government workers affected by this shutdown. They're really starting to feel the economic impact of this. Tell me what your reaction, what you think their reaction is going to be to this speech. What is the case that President Trump needs to lay out for them?
For government workers, and I worked on Capitol Hill in 2013 when the last government shutdown happened, and government workers were very focused on when they were going to get their next paycheck. Was the government shutdown going to end? Every single one of those workers that are not getting paid right now, they're going to be watching very closely. They're going to be watching it different than average Americans. They're going to want to see if there is common ground. Ultimately, they care about the wall, but not nearly as much about if they're going to get paid or not. So they're going to want to see if there's a way to thread the needle so both parties can come together, come to an agreement, and get the government back running.
Thank you so much. Brian Darling, President, political strategist for Liberty Government.
Thank you.
Thank you. Up next, another legal battle for a Christian baker in Colorado, and why this bishop's best work is sometimes up in the air.
Il nostro atteggiamento è l'indifferenza.
Pope Francis says indifference is opposed to God's love. At his daily Mass, the Holy Father said truly caring for others means putting your heart on the line. He says we should pray the Lord heals humanity, starting with ourselves. The Christian baker who won a Supreme Court case ruling Colorado had showed anti-religious bias toward him has been sued again. Jack Phillips says the state is wrongly prosecuting him. This time he declined to bake a cake for a gender transition. Last June, he won a Supreme Court case after declining a cake order for a same-sex wedding ceremony, saying it would violate his religious beliefs. For more on this story, including what Alliance Defending Freedom, a group representing Phillips, says about this case, visit our news partners at CatholicNewsAgency.com. Finally this evening, a Catholic bishop's plans for helping his far-flung flock in the Solomon Islands have really taken flight. Bishop Luciano Capelli visits Catholics across the dozens of islands in his diocese in the South Pacific by piloting this small airplane. He uses it to deliver food and medicine, and he took flying lessons in 2011 with funding from the Italian Bishops' Conference. An ultralight small plane was donated to the diocese in Gizo. He says flying is much quicker than using a boat, and it allows him to get to parishes at least 3 times a year. And the most important piece is he said he's not scared to do it. I'd be pretty scared to be doing that 3 or 4 times. For all of us here at EWTN News Nightly, to all of you around the world, thank you for watching. I'm Lauren Ashburn. Let's keep in touch online. Follow me at Lauren Ashburn on Twitter and Lauren Ashburn EWTN on Facebook. Good night, and God bless you.